Hey.
And I think the screen is still shared. Let's go back here. Share the keynote. Start the show. You seeing the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, so here we go. Develop the schedule. So we're about this process. If you've noticed, other processes take us like 10, 15 minutes. This one process is going to take us about 30 minutes. Okay, we're going to do the forward and backwards pass. I'm going to teach you critical path. I'm going to teach you about float. I'm going to teach you about, it's pretty much the big thing, the critical path, the float, and then a difference between the project schedule and the schedule baseline, right? Two big things here. So if you remember, we just did the scope baseline, and that's a WBS dictionary, scope statement. It's those three documents. Now we're going to come up with the schedule baseline. It's more of a modified version of the schedule, if you will. So this process analyzes, PMI's favorite word, means we're going to double check, measure twice, make sure we do all the good stuff and don't lose anything, don't miss anything. So all the scheduled data that we've created, this would be the list of activities, their attributes, the milestone list, if they're leads or lags, their relationships, their dependencies, their estimates. We're going to take all of that and we're going to create a detailed and realistic schedule model. All right, so we'll have the milestones within there. They're already sequenced. They're already identified. The durations have been estimated, and now we're going to go through and do this forward and backwards pass and come up with the critical path. And then once we approved, it becomes a baseline. All right, so it's a baseline that we can track back to, or it's a baseline that we can measure our progress against. But it's not the full schedule. Right. It's just what I mean by that is we will have something, project starts here, it ends here. Here's the significant points and times. That's sort of the total schedule. But the full schedule with all the activities and who's doing it and leads, lags, and that's just the project schedule, and that's different.
Okay.
So you can see here where we have multiple outputs for that. You can see how when we're done with this process of developing the schedule, we get a baseline and a project schedule. So remember, two different things. Project schedule, very detailed, what you likely use with your teammates. Schedule baseline, what you likely give the client or maybe management at your company. We'll also get the schedule data. That's all the stuff I mentioned earlier. All of these things become data, the list of activities, the duration estimates, right? We may have duration estimates and we got to go back, and because we did 3-point in the schedule data, we'll show the pessimistic, the optimistic, and the most likely. Right. So all the stuff here becomes scheduled data. We also got to look at any contracts, right? Just like when you're doing implementations with your customers, there's an agreement about when you all would complete, assuming that they do their end and hold up their end of the boat as well. So that's kind of the idea. Schedule network analysis, that term really means to do all of this. Analysis from PMI, that favorite term, means go back, look at all of this stuff, then do critical path, see if you can optimize resources, see where you can compress the schedule, see as you look at that data, analyze it as well, right? Because you're analyzing the schedule network, but then you got to analyze the data as well, right? Use a software tool if you have to. If it's Agile, make sure you have some sort of release plan or roadmap. That way you can come up with the baseline in the schedule. So we're going to use all these tools and techniques now. Whoops.
Okay.
All right, so the baseline is the approved version. It's the approved version, right? And it defines our start and our finish dates. There may be some variances, but the baseline can only be changed by change control. All right, so right now we're managing our project. Since we haven't gotten the project management plan signed off on by anybody because we're not done, if we made a change to this thing, we don't need to get approval. But the moment that we've said, okay, we think this is complete, team members have signed off on it's complete, key stakeholders have signed off on it that it's complete, and then you went back to the sponsor and said, here's our plan, and they sign off on it's complete, then any changes will require change control. So the schedule is the full activity, interaction, and delivery expectations in a clear visual format. So Whether you use a Gantt chart, that's the most popular one. Nobody really uses a schedule network diagram. It's only when we learn it here, by the way. But let me ask you that, like, how do you guys use Gantt charts?
Yeah, we do.
Do you use a schedule network diagram?
No, never.
Yeah, it's just not something
just
that people do.
Yeah, just like visually when you're explaining to a customer what the timeline looks like.
Right.
Very like general.
And so we see the bar chart, the milestone chart, or the project schedule network diagram, and this is a little misleading from PMI because they say a bar chart, a milestone chart, but really for these two models, they're really talking about the Gantt chart, right? That's what they're talking about there. All right, so here's bar charts, commonly referred to as Gantt charts. And they allow some sort of evaluation to be done, right? Because you can take a look and just see where we're at. It's pretty straightforward. Milestone charts. And these pictures are from Microsoft Project. Have you ever used that tool?
No.
This is what Project looks like. Like when you put your information in, it starts to create these graphs on the side for you.
Okay.
You put your stuff in here and then you put your dates and then it starts to do this for you. Same thing here. It'll show you your milestones and where they're at as you set up your schedule. So milestone charts, pretty straightforward, just shows, the key dates that we need to put our focus and our energy into. And then the actual schedule network diagram. All right, this is the most detailed version. So you can see the finish to start relationships there. Most of these, if not all, as I'm looking, are all finish to start relationships, right? You could have start to start, start to finish, and finish to finish. We see there. And then you can find out the critical path as you're going along. All right, so let's keep moving forward. So schedule data and the project calendar, right? Now we have resource calendars and project calendars, where project calendars say work is happening every day of the year except for major US holidays, 24 hours a day. And then you can have a resource calendar that says this resource is only available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, or Saturday and Sunday, 10 to 7, something like that. Okay, so we have the scheduled data and a project calendar. And here's the project calendar that sort of shows, well, this is really just showing like hours required versus hours needed. I'm going to show you in a second when we optimize resources, how if we, you can, I'm drawing a blank on my terms right now, but it's going to look something similar to this. So I'm going to show you that in a second. But visually, it's all about depicting the days and the shifts when work is happening. And then individual calendars, which PMI calls these resource calendars, all right, are just for people, machines, supplies as well. And then you can use software like Microsoft Project to do this. Look at error in my thing. I need to make a note to something that they need to put this. Chart needs to be behind text. Okay. All right. Now the management plan is an input here in order to create those outputs. And so, we'll look at the how we were going to do this. So that should be in our plan. We'll take documents into account. We need the activity lists. We need, predecessors and successors, leads, lags, relationships, dependencies. We'll take the scope baseline, WBS dictionary scope statement. We'll take all of that. And there's some other processes we haven't talked about yet, like the risk register, any integration, resource management processes. We haven't gotten to those yet, but we take those into account as well when you develop your schedule. Now we look and we see the tools and the techniques. And yes, this is iterative. This is an iterative model, right? You don't usually just develop a schedule in one shot, but usually you have to sort of develop it over time. Okay. So schedule network analysis. We saw this as a tool and a technique, right? So this is where we're going to do critical path, which is one of the methods here. And we're going to do the critical path so that we calculate the longest path throughout the project. And we see that there. All right. We're going to do some analysis or improvement And this is going to be resource optimization and schedule compression techniques. We'll see that in a second. And then the different ways that we can do this is critical path to develop the schedule, right? We can optimize resources. We can use the what if scenario analysis. Have you used that before?
I don't think so.
Sure, you have. We just don't walk around and say what if scenario. So imagine if you said, well, what if we used, it's just kind of like, what if we used a senior engineer versus a junior engineer? What if we used a script instead of manually, typing in some of these steps? But nobody just says, oh, let's do the what if scenario analysis today. We just don't do that. But that's what it's called, literally. Like, that's what we're doing.
Okay.
Simulation is where you just say, well, let's kind of run through this. Let's run through this and see what would happen. That's simulation analysis. Again, we don't call it that, but that's what we're doing. So I want you to recognize that so far, we've only gotten to 2 knowledge areas, really. I know we talked a little bit about integration with the chart and the project management plan, but we've really mostly seen scope. We've seen time now. We got a little bit of stakeholders. And for the most part, I hope you're recognizing that you're already doing a lot of this stuff. You just now have a term for it.
Yeah, I'm seeing that.
You're doing this stuff. You're already here. So just take homage in that like you're not far behind, And I just like to mention this when I'm in these classes because people come in, oh, formal training, I don't know what I'm doing. And it's like, no, there's no way you would be successful and still be in this role and manage to amass 4,500 hours in 36 months if you didn't know what you're doing. Now you're just gonna have you're gonna have terms for it. So let's look at all these. Critical path. Critical path allows us to understand how flexible or inflexible individual activities are along a particular path. So we'll do a forward and backwards pass. Forward pass meaning we're going to find all the early and late, start times, or excuse me, one of the early start and early finish times, the earliest that we can start and finish for everything. Then when we do a backwards pass, we'll find all the latest times that we can start and finish things. And then from there, we'll figure out what the flexibility is in each individual activity. All right. So what should we see there? We see early start, early finish, late start, late finish. And then we'll calculate float by subtracting early finish from late finish. That's how we'll do that. Sorry, my wife just sent me a message and was like, we're in the same house. Oh, I'm teaching. She probably didn't want to ignore. All right. Or I mean, not ignore, but interrupt. I'm having like a brain lockup today. All right. So critical path normally has 0 float. The reason why we say normally is because the first time you do this activity, you better get 0 float. We're going to do a forward and backwards pass, and we're going to start all the activities on day 1, and we're going to get to the last activity. Then we're going to take that last activity and we're going to work backwards. And if you don't get 0, your math is wrong. However, the moment you start running your project, you're going to get delays somewhere, right? There's no project that ever run 100%, flawless and no issues. You're going to get a delay somewhere, and that delay could show up on the critical path, and you could have a critical path that has a float of 1 or 2. So the critical path normally has a 0 float, but ultimately it's the longest chain of activities with the least amount of float. Okay, you want to make note of that somewhere. It's the longest chain with the least amount of float.
Got it.
Okay. And then we have 2 types of float: free float, total float. There's 3 types of float. There's project float. And I'll talk about that in a second. But free float, total float, you won't get tested on project float on the exam, but I just want you to know there's 3 types of floats. Okay. For the exam, free float and total float is what we'll focus on. Free float is between 2 activities. Total float is shared along a path. So we'll see that in a second. Okay, so when we calculate the critical path, we'll start with our sequence, and then we'll use something that usually looks like this, where, we sort of have the nodes. And so you have the activity, here's the node, and then the earliest day that we could start, we'll say like on day 1, and then this activity has a duration of 5. So we'll finish on day 5, right? We'll start at 8 a.m. on day 1, and then we'll finish at 5 p.m. on day 5. And the way you find that is you do the duration plus early start minus 1. So 5 plus 6 is 5, minus 1 is 5. So that's how we know, we ended there. And then we'll find out the latest date that we can start, the latest date that we can finish. And let's say these numbers were like 4 and 9. Then the way to find float is we either do late finish minus early finish, or we do late start minus early start. And it doesn't matter. You will get the same number, whether you do 4 minus 1, or you do, this should be a 5. Whether you do 5 minus 1, or you do 9 minus 5, right? You'll get 4 either way.
Okay.
So first, you have your sequence and you build your nodes out. Okay, you build them out and you put your order in. You build your nodes out, put in your durations. Then you find the early starts. Now let me teach you the forward pass. All right, so we start here and we started activity A on day 0. We added 1. So there's day 0 methodology and there's day 1 methodology. Right? This is day 0 methodology. Both of them work on the exam. And what it means is that day 0 means that there's no minus. So in this one, I taught you, we said, okay, 5 plus 1 minus, it's duration plus early start minus 1. So 5 plus 1 minus 1 equals 5. That's day 1 methodology, but it's a little bit more difficult. So we teach day 0 because it's easier, because now you don't have to do any subtract 1. You just do duration. You do early start plus duration equals early finish. So in this case, 1 plus 3 equals 4, 1 plus 2 equals 3, so on and so forth. So now we've got all these filled out. So literally what we do is we'd say here, and now we would come back and we would say, we're done with column A, all right? Early start plus duration equals early finish, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Then we say, okay, well, activity B is dependent on activity A. Activity D is dependent on activity A, and activity C is dependent on activity A, or they are predecessors. Activity A is activity A is a predecessor to B, C, and D. B, C, and D are successor activities to A.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for me to determine on which day that they will start, now for the forward pass, I'm just going to take whatever my duration is in the finish, and I'm going to add it there. So now these will start on day 1, and I'll say, okay, 3 plus 1 is 4, 2 plus 1 is 3, 5 plus 1 is 6. Okay, I'm done with this column. Now I come here and I say activity E has only one predecessor. It's B. Therefore, I choose that number. But activity F has 2 predecessors. It has C and D. Therefore, I have to pick the biggest number of the 2, because activity F cannot start until C and D are done. C will finish on day 3. D will finish on day 6. We can start activity F on day 6. So when you do a forward pass, you need to look backwards. When you do a forward pass, you look back, you find all the predecessor activities. You take the one with the biggest number, the one that ends the latest, and you use that as the forward pass. Make sense? Okay, so we follow the same suit here. Activity H is dependent on both E and F, or excuse me, in this case, it's dependent on both just E. So we get 8 there. I is dependent on both E and F. So we got to take the bigger number, which is 11. And then J is only dependent on G. So we take 9. And then now as we do the same things there, we get K is dependent on all 3. So we got to take the biggest number. We add it there. And then now we get 20. Good so far? Makes sense? Okay.
So wait, just the numbers in the middle are the durations defined, right, for the activity?
Yep.
The number of days? Oh, I see it. Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to do the backwards pass. And when we do the backwards pass, Oh man. Okay. Sorry. Note from my realtor there. When we do the backwards pass, we are going to take the smaller number. Let me explain. So when we get to our last activity, whatever your early finish is, you are going to set the late finish equal to the early finish because we want to work backwards. If this is the earliest day that we can finish, okay, we finished it. This is also the latest day that we can finish it. All right, we can finish activity K on day 20. Now we're going to work backwards and we'll do late finish minus duration, right? So 20 minus 4 is 16. Okay, great. So then all three, now when we do the backwards pass, 8 from K to H, we look forward and we say, how many successor activities? Oh, only one? Okay, we're going to take that number. Take that number, take that number, right? So now 16, then we do 16 minus 7, 16 minus 2, 16 minus 4, and then we're done with this column. And say, okay, activity E only has one, it's H, so we're going to take the 12. Excuse me, it has two. It has the 14 and the 12. I missed that one there. You're right. So it has two successor activities. Now when we do the backwards pass, we're going to take the smaller number. So we have 12 there. F, just from I, so we get the 14, 9 and 9. We say, okay, good. We're done with this column. Then 9 minus 3 is 6. 14 minus 5 is 9. 12 minus 4 is 8. And now we come back here. We say B has only one successor activity. It's 8. We go there. We see C only has one successor activity. It's 9. We go there. We see D has both F and G. So we take the smaller number when we go backwards and we put that there. And 6 minus 5 is 1. 9 minus 2 is 7. 8 minus 3 is 5. And now activity A is a predecessor to all three, or B, C, and D are all successors. So we take 5, 7, 1. I'm going to take the smaller number, use this, and then 1 minus 1 is 0. Okay, so when we do the forward pass, we take the bigger number. When we do the backwards pass, we take the smaller number. Okay. Now that we have our early starts, our early finishes, we did the forward pass, then we did the backwards pass, and we got our late finish and our late start. Now we're going to subtract the late finish from the early finish, or the late start from the early start, and then get float. And then that's what we see here. So 1 minus 1, 8 minus 4, 9 minus 3, or 7 minus 1. All right. 1 minus 1, or 6 minus 6, 9 minus 6, 12 minus 8, 9 minus 9, 9 minus 9, 16 minus 13, 16 minus 12. We get our float numbers. Now we can determine the critical path. And all you need to do is go find the path with the least amount of float, normally 0. And where do we see our critical path?
A, D, G, J, K.
Perfect. So now what this really means, well, let me ask you, do you know what the critical path really means? Has anybody taught you this?
No, I've just watched some LinkedIn learning videos, but I don't really know exactly what it means.
What did those videos say? I'm curious. I feel like I need to make a whole LinkedIn course because I'm like, sometimes these people are giving out bad info.
Yeah, they basically just like state what the book says without really providing any context. So I like in like a practical sense, I don't know how we would use it. It's just
okay, I'm gonna give it to you right now.
Yeah.
So if this was an implementation project, then these activities right here is where if you get any delay to any one of these activities, we'll delay your project. See, I have activity 1. These 3 are dependent upon it. So any delay to activity 1 is going to delay the start of these. So if I get a delay of a day here, it's going to show up here. But activity C, this can actually, it only takes 2 days. This one only takes 3. This one takes 5. Therefore, I can wait a couple days. I can start on day 5 and end on day 8. And on this one, I can start on day 7 and end on day 9. But on this one, I need to end on day 6. Right? So I have a little bit of float. I have a couple extra days here, right? Because this one needs to complete here, and then same thing here. Start on day 4, start on day 6, start on day 6, end on day 8, 11, or 9. Well, therefore, since this one has 0 float, it must finish. But I can likely start on day 9, end on day 14, start on day 8, end on day 12. And I still will be okay, because since these activities, right, only a duration of 4, only a duration of 2, and this is going to end on 16, this is going to end on 16, and this is going to end on day 16. Well, I got a little bit of days to play, right? I can start on day 9 and end on day 14, because this is only going to take 2 days. And assuming I get no more delays here, I can start on day 14, still end on day 16. That's just fine, because I'm going to end on day 16 with this one, and we won't get a delay here. So
I see.
that's what float tells us. It tells us that, like, okay, I need to be putting all my effort and energy into making sure that, like, we order the right products, we got the best resources on here, we've estimated accurately. If anything, we put some, you know, we do some mitigation. We add some things, we take some action, some activity to minimize the problem, the probability, or the impact of anything negative happening. So we got to do all that here. Where on these days, we could probably play around and train people, because if we're, you know, if we miss a couple days, it's okay. Not going to hurt the project, right? So float is the amount of time that you can delay an activity without delaying the project. So I can delay this one for 4 days, 6 days, 3 days, 4 days, 3 days, 4 days. I can delay any of those for up to that amount of days and not delay the project.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the
Okay.
second, let's say activity H takes me 6 days and I don't end on day 18, right? My critical path is now going to change. So your critical path is not static, by the way, it is dynamic. When you first create it, it's going to be static and it's going to have a 0 float. As you run your projects, it's dynamic, because things happen. You don't know what's going on. For instance, I say don't know what's going on, but I mean, it's like you just don't know what may happen. If all of a sudden activity C gets a delay of 7 days and it ends on day 10, okay, then our critical path is going to flip and it's going to go to A, C, F, and then it could go up here, but it likely would just go straight through, because what happens if this is going to take 10 days, that means I could delay this a day and not, and be okay, because this would start on 10, end on 15, this would start on 15, end on 17. That means I could end on day 7, start on 7, end on day 10, start on day 10, end on day 17. So my critical path would then switch here. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So the critical path is not static. It is dynamic when you're running the project. It is only static when you first do it as an exercise.
Got it.
Okay, so you got to be able to test and manage your schedule to assure that, like, yeah, we can be able to do this. And what we mean by that is we got to go and optimize the resources, because we may have a huge need for a resource. In order to get an activity done, we may need that resource to work 11 hours. But that person's not going to work 11 hours, or they're maybe they don't agree to overtime. Maybe they're salaried and they're like, nope, I'm not doing it. So we got to be able to level resources, and we got to be able to smooth resources. Now, let me show you some pictures of these. So let me go leveling. Tell me my hard drive is plugged in. Smoothing. All right, let's go to. Oh, that's why, for whatever reason, it's not showing up in here. Oh, there it goes. Hard drive 2. Okay, and then let's pull up our PMP picks, data, check sheet, resource optimization, and then let's share this. Let's go to new share, and let's share this. Okay, so you see this funky little picture with leveling and smoothing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so sometimes we'll have resources and they'll, so here's our periods, week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then during this period of week 1, this resource, it needs what looks like maybe 10 hours a day, 16 hours a day, maybe 15 hours a day. Only maybe 5 hours a day here, maybe 7, maybe 15 again, and like maybe like 18 or 19 hours a day. So perhaps we can't do that. Maybe this is a case where this is union labor and they're only going to work 8 hours a day. So if that's the case, we're going to level them out. And leveling, by contrast, does not care about the hard deadline, because what it's going to do is all these little squiggly lines here, right? All that extra time, it's going to first look to level up. It will first look to fill in any areas here. And then the remaining time, we'll just go out period 1, period 2, period 3, right? It'll add, in this case, period 8, 9, 10, and maybe there's an 11 that's like real small. Well, who knows? Now, maybe your deadline wasn't until the 15th period and you were looking really good, and then you just leveled your resources out. And now it went to the 10th, period 8, 9, and 10, and you're still going to complete your project in time. However, by definition, leveling does not care about the hard deadline. It does not care where it's at. It's just going to put those level lines where they need to be. Smoothing, by contrast, cares about the deadline. It will not allow you to slip the schedule. So the reason why I have this question mark here is like, these are discretionary activities. Can we perhaps do smooth out the peaks and valleys so we don't have such of a big jump? But if not, we got to do what we got to do. So smoothing will not let the schedule slip. Leveling will. You need to remember that for the exam, right?
Okay.
So leveling will push the schedule out. Smoothing will not.
Got it.
Let's go back to the keynote. Okay. So that's leveling and smoothing. Leveling will push the schedule out. All right, push out. Smoothing will not, all right? Will not slip.
So what's in it? So for leveling, the example that you used was like someone got working in 8-hour day and that's all they could work. But what about for smoothing?
Yeah, for smoothing, it's sort of like, well, you're stuck with what you're stuck with. Let me, did I close that? Oh, here it goes. Let me show it again. Okay, so a really common example of this is testing for smoothing, right? So the team's doing work, and then all of a sudden they're like, okay, we're done. Testers come in and test. And then now they have this huge load. So they ask first, okay, can we do some of the stuff up front? Can we test some of the stuff as you build in the beginning? But if not, well, then you're going to have, maybe 2 8-hour shifts or 3 8-hour shifts, to combat what you need in order to hit the schedule. So it's just the idea that like smoothing, it isn't going to push it out. And so in this case, you just got to double up, triple up, use additional resources.
I see.
Now, leveling can, remember you can level up. So we can move this line up to 16, up to, let's say, 15. And then it's going to take what was left up here and what was left up here. And it's going to try to first fill in everything else before it's going to make level lines. But by definition, it doesn't care where that deadline is. It's just going to push it out.
I see.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Where is our mail flag messages? Where'd it go? Keynote? No keynote? Let's see this here. Done. Exit. Oh, maybe I have to stop the share. Start a new share. Uh-oh. Where'd it go? Okay. Let's exit out of here. Let's exit out of that. Okay, I see keynote here. So share screen. There we go. Okay, you can't have it playing. You have to do that. All right.
Okay.
So that's leveling that I just showed you. Leveling and smoothing. These are resource allocation, resource optimization, excuse me, resource optimization techniques, leveling and smoothing. Okay, leveling will let the schedule slip, smoothing will not. All right, then we have the what if scenario analysis. So we talked about this, like what if we use a senior engineer versus junior engineer? What if we use the script? All right, that's all that is. And then simulation. Have you heard of Monte Carlo simulation?
No.
Okay, so not the car, but Monte Carlo is a software and it runs tens of thousands of simulations. All right, so did you grow up with any brothers that played, or maybe does your husband play video games?
No.
Oh, you're lucky. I don't either. This is big.
Very lucky. Yep.
But I have a lot of buddies that do,
Yeah.
and they like to play the sports games. And when you play the sports games, I guess it's evolved to the point you don't really play anymore. It's like you're the manager of the team, and then you just put it on simulation, and you see if your team wins. That's Monte Carlo, right? It's running it. Now, you've probably heard of John Madden football. Okay, so that game's like one of the most popular sports games. And in that game now, it's the same thing. Like the way you play now, yeah, sure, you can still play and like play as a running back, receiver, quarterback. For the most part, it's gotten to the point where it's like, no, you're a GM, you pick your team and you trade and you get your players, you develop your playbook, and then you run and you see, like, will I win the season? You can play by yourself or you can just let the computer do it. Now, their software is so good because they take into account how does a player play at night or in inclement weather or against this coach or at that coach. They take all that data into account. They'll run tens of thousands of simulations, and then right before the Super Bowl, they'll give their prediction. Now, if you're a football fan, you probably would remember that back in the day, the Super Bowl, it's always 2 weeks. So right before the Super Bowl, the Pro Bowl, the Pro Bowl would happen. Or actually it wouldn't happen. And so we'd have those 2 weeks. And so there would be like the media day and all the circus and stuff. And then John Madden will come out and they'll do their game and they'll give they'll give a prediction of who they think is going to win. And Monte Carlo is so accurate that they picked 13 of the 15 winners. They got really close within the score that Vegas put pressure on them to not give out their odds until the day of the game. Okay. So that's one of the common places that Monte Carlo is used that people don't even know. Here's the second place that Monte Carlo is used that you see every day, or at least when you do watch, is if you're ever watching the news and you get the weather comes up and they're saying, oh, we've got this hurricane that's coming down the panhandle of Florida. It's about to go into the Gulf Coast, and you're seeing it, and it's going like this, and little hurricane, little pattern, little swirly things are going around. That's Monte Carlo. They're taking, what are the current patterns? What's the temperature? What's the air pressure? How much moisture? Like they're taking all of this stuff, and then they're looking at the almanac, the farmer's almanac that has all this information from previous years, and then are using that to model the data. And the way they model the data is then with colors. It's represented on the screen by colors, and you'll see oranges and reds and yellows, and it'll move across the screen. That's Monte Carlo. Now, you might have seen somewhere like it kind of, and in others that's real nice and smooth. The only difference between those two stations is that one station had a lot of money and it had a more powerful system. And so it can just run more simulations and give you a smoother data line. So next time you're watching channels and you notice one there, then you can automatically assume, okay, this company doesn't really pump that much money into their news stations, right? Because all news is like, it doesn't make money. It's a loss. It's a loss for companies. So it's like, how do we save money? Oh, we don't need to run as many. We can just do a 50% Monte Carlo instead of 100% and save us some money on the software. So that's how that works. And another way that you'll see that, just to give you another example, the dry time of concrete. So they'll figure out big, large public works projects, and they're building bridges or roads, and they need to know like how long would it take based on the temperature now, especially when we get into fall. In October, we have these days where it can get up to 85, 90 degrees, but then at night it can drop and be pretty cold. Well, when you have that, you have these fluctuations in temperature that can cause stress, and it can cause the tensile strength won't be there. So the integrity won't be as good. So they'll run Monte Carlo to see, should we use fast set drying concrete, which is a lot more expensive than regular, but will help us not have to rework and break it up. So I spent a lot of time on that because this is going to come up on the exam a lot. We'll see Monte Carlo again when we develop the budget, because we'll have risk analysis and reserve analysis there when we estimate dollars. We'll see it again when we're just looking at risk in general and thinking about what things may happen along the course of the project. So that's what Monte Carlo is, running tens of thousands of simulations to tell you, what may or may not happen.
Got it.
Okay. So now we have the schedule compression techniques. How do we compress the schedule? Well, we have two ways. You can crash it and you can fast track it. Now, crashing for the exam, what you need to know for the exam is that crashing increases cost. Costs go up with crashing, but there's no risk. Okay. And with fast tracking, right, your risk increases. Your risk goes up with fast tracking, but there's no additional cost associated with it. Let me explain. I need something here. All right, I'm going to use this cap. Let's go here. Okay. Exit out of this. All right. So, pen cap. Okay. And let's say the process to making this pen cap is that we make a mold for the cap. We make a mold for the pen body. We pour a compound into the mold for the cap. We pour a compound in the mold for the pen body. We test the cap and the pen. Okay, looks good. Insert felt with ink. Put the cap on, goes into a box, goes down a conveyor belt, puts a little cellophane wrapping, slaps a label, and it goes off, right? That's our production line. Follow me so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now if I want to, so if that's my process, so now that I've poured the molds for the cap and it worked, I poured the mold for the pen and it works. Now I'm going to produce 1 million caps. Pour mold for this cap, produce 1 million caps. Then I'm going to test a bunch of caps to this body, make sure they all look good. And they all work, okay? Then I'm going to make 1 million pen bodies. I'm going to test them with the caps. Okay, that would be our process. All right, so now if I crash the schedule, then I will pour the mold for the pen cap, or pour the mold for the body. And when it looks good, I will start to mass produce my pen caps. But instead of having one production line of 1 million units, I might run 4 production lines of 250,000. So now I do it in a quarter time. Now that's going to cost me money, because anytime you have a production run, the longer it is that you're doing the same thing, you save money. But if you want to do one thing, it takes so much just to set it up and get it going, that costs a lot of money. So it's like having, instead of having one person work for 8 hours, I'm going to bring 4 people in and have them work for 2 hours, right? But there may be a 4-hour minimum with those people. So now I'm paying for 16. But either way, if I want to get my work done quicker, I've got to pay a price for that. So I'm still doing everything in order. So there's no risk, but it's going to cost me money. Okay. So now fast tracking says, well, I'm going to make the mold for the pen cap. I'm going to make the mold for the body. I'm going to test the pen cap for the body. They both work. I'm going to mass produce 1 million pens in one production run, and I'm going to mass produce 1 million bodies on the next production run. Okay. Not going to cost me any more money. Even though I'm doing them at the same time, I was still going to do one production run of $1 million, which was going to cost me money. And I was going to do another production run of 1 million, and that was going to cost me money. I'm just now doing it at the same time. I'm doing them in parallel. But that's where the risk comes in, because now what happens if 3 days later, this thing, when it dries, it shrinks by, I don't know, 0.03 of a millimeter. And while it fits, that's just enough for it to be way too tight to put on or to take off. And so now the experience of the consumer is not that great and people stop buying the pens.
Mm.
So that's where fast tracking gets risky because we are doing activities out of order. We're doing them in parallel. And because of that, there's risk of rework or scrapping. Crashing is not going to do stuff out of order. So it's not going to increase your risk, but it's going to cost you money because you're going to start to double up, triple up, quadruple up on resources to get it done quicker.
I see.
All good?
Yep.
Okay. So it's crashing and fast tracking. And that made sense? That example made sense to you?
Yeah, it does
Okay.
make sense.
Good. I just kind of make things up as I go along, like whatever I see, so I always, and usually it does, but every once in a while somebody's like, no, that didn't make any sense. So I always got to check.
No, it really did make sense.
Okay. I need to end this real quick.
And then it makes me like question like my processes at my own job.
Well, yeah, because now you're seeing at times when you decide to fast track and decide to crash, you were just like in your mind, you weren't saying I'm going to compress the schedule. I'm going to do a schedule compression technique. You didn't use that term, but in your mind, that's what you were doing. You're like, I got to get this done quicker. How can we do it? What if we did this stuff at the same time? Well, now you know the term for that. You're fast tracking some activities, and the other one's like, well, what if we just get more bodies? What if we add a couple more people to help with the implementation? That's then crashing the schedule. So now you know the term for those two things you're doing.
Yeah, and I know which ones they're using, and it doesn't look like it's working.
All right, so that's, and by the way, if you have a single phase project, right, as a schedule compression technique, if you had a single phase project, fast tracking wouldn't actually work, because even if you do activities in parallel and out of order, there's still a critical path. And like those usually have finish to start relationships, mandatory dependencies. So there's nothing you can do there. But if you have a multi-phase project, which is, let's say, I'm trying to compare this in your world without fully knowing your product. Let's say that, you can install, let's say you have a client that has 4 instances that they want to have installed, and you are going to do each instance in a phase. Well, if you decide to do all 4 phases at the same time, then you can compress that total schedule down. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So fast tracking really only works as a true like total schedule compression technique if you have multiple phases. If you don't, then you're really just increasing risk for no reason, because you have a critical path that needs to be followed. So just keep that in mind too.
Okay.
All right, why is this not playing on here?
So are crashing and fast tracking the only schedule compression techniques, or simulation is not a part of it, right? That's a different technique. Okay.
Yeah, you're not compressing the schedule with simulation. You're just modeling it. So good question. You can model the schedule by simulation. You can crash it with fast tracking or crashing. You can compress it with fast tracking or crashing, and then you can optimize resources with leveling or smoothing.
Got it.
All right, case study time.
Okay.
All right, when you let me know you're done, whoops. Excuse me, I need to get the Zoom thing out into the other screen. There we go. Then put this back there. Okay, whoops. Okay, go ahead.
All right, hold on.
Excuse me while I stuff my face here. I'm
No
on
worries at
breakfast.
all.
I just I woke up, I started messing around in the garden this morning, and then it was like, oh crap, it's 9:20.
It's like you're intermittent fasting.
All right, so what schedule compression technique did the team use? Well, first, which two can you eliminate immediately?
Resource smoothing and resource leveling.
Perfect. So you know it's not one of those two. So now it's between B and C.
I'm gonna go with C.
Okay. What compression technique did the team use in example B?
Oh man, I didn't realize there were two examples.
That's okay. If you chose, there's only two, right? So if you chose crashing, then this one must be fast tracking. Because if you chose fast tracking on this one, then the second one must be crashing. See, that right there is a what's the term? It's a multiple choice exam technique, meaning because a lot of times, like on PMI's exam, they don't do this to you, by the way, because this makes it easy. Give you a data set or like a paragraph to read and then ask you a series of questions about it. They don't do that. You'll get this. You see these three questions? That'll be question 14, 97, and 132. So
I
they
see.
don't put them in order like that, right? And
Yeah.
so what I mean by this in terms of a multiple choice exam technique is that if you do get a data set, because while I say, by the way, they don't do that, there are still some reported people who are getting some of this, but I'm talking like in the 1,700 students I've had, I'm saying like 30 people, right? So for the most part, people don't get those exams where you get a data set to read and then you get a series of questions behind it. It's usually just paragraph, question, okay? So the multiple choice exam technique says that, well, if you ask me two questions from the same data set, more than likely that one answer is one and the other one's the other. So if I pick crashing here, then I need to pick fast tracking on the next. If I pick fast tracking there, I need to pick crashing on the next. So that's just sort of something to think about when you're taking any multiple choice exam.
Okay, got it. Then I want to switch the first one to B and the second one to C.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Then what's the largest impact of crashing that John must evaluate and account for?
B.
Why B?
Because crashing could incur more cost to the project.
But it doesn't increase your crashing increases your cost.
It doesn't increase your risk.
Good. Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Let's see how we did.
Yeah.
Okay. So you got it right for the third one. The first two were just backwards.
Oh.
And this little diagram wasn't going to give you much anyways. But
I wasn't looking at that.
Oh, you're reading. Good. Because the diagram wasn't going to give you anything. It was, you have to read the paragraph. But good. When you just know that, in the exam, if you hear something about adding bodies, adding people, adding machines, material supplies, resources, then we're crashing it. It's like, okay, this just came to my mind. Now, what's the best way to end a party? To crash it. Get all these people to show up, all these new people that weren't invited, and then people like, what? And then party's over. What? Right?
Okay.
Right. So that's kind of the idea is like, if you crash it, you finish sooner. But if you fast track it, that's not a good example. I don't want you to think of that in your head anymore because there's no fast tracking. I guess the fast tracking would be you needed to have two parties And so instead of having one on Saturday and one on Sunday, you just had two houses going on. You had two house parties at the same time. But no, this example totally sucks. So get it out your head. But I think you get it. Crashing, adding resources. When they talk about doing multiple activities at the same time or in parallel, then we're talking crash tracking.
Okay, yeah, I think I got it. I don't remember the examples in the story.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then question C would have told me the answer to, question 3 would have given me the answer to the first question.
Right. Good. I didn't even mention that yet. That's another. So this is and we get to the end, I'll really deep dive into strategy, but I mentioned this earlier on our first session about, you want to utilize the features on the exam that say, take me to all the questions that I've marked for review, or take me to all the questions that I left blank. Therefore, you can just leave some questions blank on purpose. Say, I'm going to leave all these math or network schedule diagram or whatever. So that way, as you're jumping forward, 52 to 77 to 93 to 146, you'll know that, oh crap, when you get to 146, I did 77 wrong, and you'll be able to jump back easier than if you were doing the questions in order. And when you got to question 146, you're like, oh, I had something a while ago I answered it wrong. Now you're going to go spend 4 or 5 minutes going back looking for that question. And you might not ever find it. This is a waste of time. So I'm going to give you a lot of strategies that will combat against stuff like that. And one of them is grouping question types. So that way, some questions will reveal the answer to previous or questions that follow. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so here we go, cost management. And before we go, I just have a question for you, because this is what my phone's blown up, and I was like, right. So tomorrow, instead of 9:30 to 12 and go from break from 12 to 12:30, is it possible to go from 9:30 to 1:30 and have a break from 1:30 to 2?
Yeah, that works.
Okay. Then I'll be able to run out, open up the property for people to see and come back. So, okay.
Yeah, no problem.
Appreciate the flexibility there. And by the way, because it is just me and you too, I'm also flexible. So for instance, we start at 6:30. If you're like, CJ, we want to start at 6, or CJ, we want to start at 7. Same thing with these weekends classes. As we move forward, if you need a little bit of flexibility, just let me know. It's all good.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, CJ.
All right, so here we go to cost. So cost is pretty straightforward. We're going to come up with our how, and then we'll estimate and we'll determine the budget. Just like we did here, we came up with our how, but we had to define activities and sequence first. Then we estimated and came up with the schedule. We're going to do the how, estimate the cost, come up with the budget. All right, so what we're doing here. Is this showing up? Yes, it is. All right. So the point of focus here is to get a cost management plan so that we can determine our how and then go back in and do the cost and the budget. Now, by the way, it is common for many PMs to come back to first, before they do any work on the project, to develop all their plans, scope management, schedule management, cost, quality, resources, communications, risk, procurement, stakeholder, to come up with all those plans first, then go back and collect requirements, define scope, define activity, sequence them, estimate durations, develop the schedule, estimate costs, so on and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, is it the like the 5.1, 6.1 outputs?
Yep. All those
Okay.
point ones are management plans. Exactly. So it's very common for people to just go say, let me do all of my management plans and figure out how I'm going to do this whole thing first, and then we'll go and do all this other stuff.
Okay.
Oh, okay. We're going to skip that. No more 12:30, 2:30. People change to 4. And with this, I'm turning my phone off because it's not right that I'm all up in this while doing your thing. But we're scratching the thing for tomorrow.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so let's jump in to cost management. And the idea is that we should start early in the project. This is very true, right? We got to start as early as we can so we can come up with an accurate baseline. We can estimate everything. We don't want to wait to the end. We don't want to be running projects and we don't know how much money we've spent or what we plan to spend or anything like that. So we want to start as early as possible. And the nature of the project is really going to determine like what our moves are, right? Is it predictive, like waterfall, and then we can really estimate everything, or is it adaptive, and we should really only be estimating the stuff that's immediately in front of us, and then the stuff that comes later, we'll get to it. There's a term for that. Do you remember? Near-term activities in high detail, but long-term activities, we kind of just do it later.
Rolling wave plan.
Beautiful, beautiful. Rolling wave planning. All right, so in order to get a management plan, it's a very straightforward process. There's not much to it. We want to come up with our how. So we'll use our judgment, and it could be folks in different departments that might help us, but we'll use their judgment. We'll then go and analyze the information we have. We'll have meetings with a bunch of people to look over the charter, our plans, EFs, OPAs, and then come up with a management plan for cost. Okay. All right, so what's our units of measure? How precise do we need to be? How accurate? What data sources are we going to choose? How often will we update the budget? When will we report out? So how. Okay, so there's not much to it. All right, you need the charter. Since there's a high level information, you need schedule and risk, because anything that may delay the schedule or cause issues from risk will cost you money. So you got to think about that as well. And then EFs and OPAs, market conditions, exchange rates, but it could also be, interest rates on the loans that you have, right? Those things are out of your control. And so you got to try to control what's in your power as much as possible so that you minimize the impacts of things like that. And then OPAs, you maybe have certain ways that you have to spend money, or certain ways that you have to track it, right? So we'll think about all those stuff. We'll take them into account. We'll work with the, financial gurus, either within our project team, our PMO, or within the organization, maybe in finance, right? We'll talk with them. We'll look for alternatives to develop the budget and to manage it and to report out. If there's any that are better than what we're thinking now, that's the alternatives analysis. And that's pretty much it. You'll come up with a plan. So now that we have a plan, let's go and estimate. And so this is the first two processes used to create the budget. We do this one first, and then in the next one, we'll add everything up. When we get to determine budget, we'll do something called cost aggregation. But for now, we're just estimating, and we get an approximation of the monetary resource need, right? Because we already have, let's say, materials and supplies that we're going to buy stuff from. We don't need to estimate that. That's already set. So we already know how much that money is. We now need to go estimate all the unknowns so that we can then develop something that's going to be useful and valuable to the team. So, and the project. So we also need to get the cost baseline when we're done, when we determine the budget, and using the cost baseline, then, it'll be authorized and signed off on. All right. So remember, we need cost estimates. We need a basis of those estimates, and then we may update some other documents because of it. Mm-hmm. All right, so here's all the ITTOs. We're looking to come up with the estimates and their basis. So we're going to use the same estimating techniques that we've seen in schedule. Nothing new here. Mm-hmm. Which one is the most accurate?
Bottom up.
Which one costs the most?
Bottom up.
Good. Which one's the least accurate?
Analogous.
Which one takes some historical statistic?
Parametric.
Which one is the fastest to do?
Analogous.
Okay, so now these are already in your head. This is good. Now what we need to talk about here is we just need to expand upon the 3-point estimating. Not a whole lot of new info here. Okay, so here's some cost estimates. Key output, it would look like this. This is not a sanctioned view, by the way. Your cost estimates could be on a sheet of paper or the back of a napkin. Seriously, PMI does not say that, PMI is not very, prescriptive. Mm-hmm. They will not tell you how to do something. They will just say that this needs to be done. You need to have cost estimates. They won't say how it needs to be done or how you should do it, because it depends. That's their answer.
Right.
Basis of estimates, same thing like when we looked at the the scheduling and the durations. We need to get the logic behind these costs now. Why did we use these data sets? Why did we determine that 3-point estimating for simple was good here, but then for this session, we need to use beta or PERT? We got to be able to say those things. And we'll take some documents into account, the assumptions log, lessons learned register or risk register. By the way, that term from PMI, register, if you're a lady, I'm not going to ask you your age, but I don't know if you remember. I don't know if you're old enough to remember when we would have, like, in our checkbooks, like a little carbon copy, and on the back there would be a ledger, and you'd have to write down, that our check register.
Yeah, like when you balance your checkbook.
Okay, so you remember that. All right,
Yeah.
you remember that. All right, that term register from PMI, it's a living, breathing document, right? As you balance it, that those numbers are running and they're living and breathing. They're real numbers. That's the same thing with the risk register, the lessons learned register, and there is a stakeholder register, right? For the exam. The registers, living, breathing documents that we continually update and consult. We look at it, we use it on an ongoing basis. So just want to mention that here. All right. There.
Assumption logs, like logs are they living, breathing also?
No, because logs, you just log something in there. That's it. All right. A register can change over time. Okay. And here's what I mean. In your stakeholder register, people can go from positive to negative and from negative to positive, from powerful to no power, right? Same thing. And you would consult it in on a regular basis. I need to go look at my stakeholder register to see how this stakeholder might react in this sense. A log is just, oh, here's an assumption. Let's just go log it. All right. It's just log the assumption, so we know, log the constraint. It's not something that you like always use and update and look at every day. But a stakeholder register, that'd be something to be using all the time. Lessons learned, you should be using that all the time. We should be doing lessons learned or retrospectives every 2 to 3 weeks, not at the end of the project, because, look, the study shows 6 weeks is the longest the human brain can really go back to. I'm like, man, I struggle to remember 2 to 3 weeks ago. Like that, like there's just so much happening that, unless it was something that's truly significant, don't ask me about our project that we've been running since February of this year and what I thought about it in March and in April. Like, I have no idea. And with COVID, it seems like we're still in March. It's like Groundhog Day anyways, right? So it's like,
right.
What am I going to know? So just from colleague to colleague, you should be doing your retrospectives or your lessons learned more frequently, shorter, frequent durations, so that you can use it. All right, but that's a register because you're gonna use it, you're gonna update it, you're gonna consult it. So those terms, my risk register, stakeholder register, lessons learned register. But now coming back to cost, right? The risk register will look at it because if there's some risk that we got to put contingency reserves aside for, we want to estimate that as well. All right, so they serve as both inputs and outputs because you'll use them. What do we learn? What are the risks? You'll estimate, and then at the end, here's some new risk, or we learned something else. So that's kind of the idea why they're both inputs and outputs.
Okay.
So, and by the way, all the inputs are outputs. Like some people are like, you know what, CJ, I need to memorize all of these things, right? I mean, people are diverse. So you teach a lot of students and you recommend that everybody doesn't memorize because I'm going to teach you in a certain way. You still have the 20% that's their process, and that's okay. I respect it. But I will tell people, I'm like, okay, well, if you're going to memorize all the outputs, all the inputs and outputs, you don't need to memorize the inputs because by definition, the input from one process was the output from the prior process. Are you noticing that so far?
Yeah.
So the only process that we have inputs that were not created by us is the charter. And those inputs are the business case. Yeah, because we not developing a business case. We're going to manage a project to achieve it. The benefits management plan, because again, we're not determining what benefits need to happen and need to be sustained. We are going to help manage a project to achieve the benefit. Right? Any contracts, again, because we're project managers, we're not contracting with folks. So aside from that process, every other process, the inputs from that process is typically the output from the previous process. All right. So if you know all the outputs, you by default know all the inputs, and all the outputs are documents. And if you know all the outputs, you by default know all the tools and you by default know all the tools and the techniques without even memorizing those, because you'll know that, okay, outputs are only documents, tools and techniques are activities or actions. So again, just trying to give you another way to think about it. All right, so also we take documents into account as well, the schedule, resource requirements, risk register, okay. EEFs come into account here when you're estimating as well, and we got to think about market conditions. So now not just the cost of something, but where's the supply? Where's the demand? Do we have it? So this could be, this could be engineers at your company. Maybe there's a lack of engineers. Your company, maybe this could also be, right, EEFs. This could also be maybe your company now has to adhere to some sort of like diversity plan, because that's the big thing now with tech companies, like some diversity. We gotta hire from all around, but it's like, you know what? Look, I'm as liberal as they come, but I'll be the first person to tell you that, in most of the classes that I took and all my scientific courses and stuff like that, I was usually the only Black person in that class. So I can't imagine that companies are just going to go out and just try to find a whole bunch of people to hire if that's not, if they don't exist within the market, right? So that's supply and demand. It's sort of like the lower the number of engineers, the higher dollar amount, right? You got a lot of companies with engineers way more than the managers and VPs and stuff like that, because they're actually doing the work that makes the money. So like, this comes into play a lot in exam. They'll give you a lot of examples about EEFs. And, so just keep that in mind, that it's stuff that's out of our control. We can't control, how many people have a skill set in a particular locale. All right. Exchange rates and inflation, any published commercial information. These are databases that exist. So like you can go and say, how much would it cost for me to have union labor pull number 14 stranded wire from inside my wall up to the top of the ceiling so I can install a projector? And you can go and look at published commercial information and say, oh, okay, it's about $28 an hour. And it typically costs, it typically takes 0.75 of an hour, like something like that, right? So you can find that information. And then the same thing as with estimate activity durations, the 4 estimating techniques are the same: analogous, parametric, bottom up, and 3-point estimating. These 3. Let's talk about 3-point estimating. Okay, so we had the triangular or the simple that we talked about earlier. Now we have the beta or PERT. And so you will need to memorize both of these formulas. When you take the exam, first 10 minutes, you're going to start writing down all your formulas, and you're going to say, okay, yeah. And I prefer it to think of it this way. This is what you're seeing here is consistent with the PMBOK, right? But I prefer if we did pessimistic plus 4 times most likely plus optimistic and then divide by 6 for memorizing. And the reason why I prefer that you memorize it that way is because now that you know that, then to find a standard deviation, that equals pessimistic minus optimistic divided by 6. So just to have the P always to start, P plus 4M plus O divided by 6, that gives me and this is called the estimated activity cost, or estimated, if we were doing time, estimated activity duration, right? The formula for those is pessimistic plus 4 times most likely plus optimistic divided by 6. Then you find your standard deviation, pessimistic minus optimistic, divide by 6. And let me clear my screen real quick. Okay, now that we have that, and put this over here, we know P minus O divided by 6. What happens is 1 standard deviation is equal to, and you want to make a note of this or write this down, 68.26 level of confidence. Okay. 2 standard deviations equals a 95.46 level of confidence. Okay. And 3 standard oops. Oh, I'm going to do it all over because of my fingers. Yes. Okay. So 1, 2, 3 equals 68. I can use my finger. My little pen thing is not working as well. Let's try this one. I have another one. Where is it? Let's try this one. There we go. 68.26. This is a 95.46 level of confidence. This is a 99.73 level of confidence. And PMI does not test you on 4 sigma or 5 sigma. These are sigmas here, these little squiggly lines, but they will test you on 6 sigma. And that is 99.999. Well, they have it as 7. But real standard deviation is 99.99966. Okay. Now, see something here. Let's use, I'm just finding white space. Okay, I'm going to use this. So I'm going to draw standard deviation. Okay, you've likely seen something like this before. Okay. And let's make these lines a little longer, and then and 1, 2, 3 here, right? Oops. So this line, this middle line, I should make it solid, would be my average or my mean, right? This would be your P plus 4M plus O, all right? That whole thing divided by 6 would give you this number here, your average, okay? Then you have 1 standard deviation on each side. You have 2 standard deviations away from the mean. You have 3 standard deviations away from the mean, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is not 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's not how that works. All right. That's just 3 standard deviations. If I want to go to 6 standard deviations, then I got to go out here and out here and out here. And I got to get 4 standard deviations, 5 standard deviations, 6 standard deviations away from the mean. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 standard deviations away from the mean. Okay. So now we have these, we found our number. And go forward. And I'll draw another little one here. We found our number and we have our little like that. And then we have these lines, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, right? So you have your middle number and then you have 1 standard deviation, 2, and then 3. So what we do is we say here, okay, Karen's going to take Bart. It's going to take her on average. I think we came up with 122.5 minutes. So that would be that number there. And then we did P minus O divided by 6, and we got, I think, 17.5. So let's just call it 17. Okay. So now what we do is we say, and I need a little bit more white space, so I'm going to jump back here, is we say 122 plus minus 17, 122 plus minus 34. That would be 2 standard deviations. Follow me so far?
Yep.
And then 122 plus minus 17 and 34 would be 51. Okay. So then what happens, right? You have 1 standard deviation, 2 standard deviations, 3 standard deviations, right? And so here we would get 139. Through here, we would get 156. And from here, we would get 173. Okay. And I would say that I have a 68.26 level of confidence here, a 95.46 level of confidence here, and a 99.73 level of confidence there. Yep. So using beta or PERT, I can say that I have a 68.26 level of confidence that Karen will arrive to work within 139. If I give her 139 minutes, she'll be on time 68.26% of the time. If I give her 156 minutes to show up to work, or if she gives herself that much time, even if there's delays, she'll probably still make it to work on time 95.46% of the time. And I have a 99.73 level of confidence that if I allow her to allocate 173 minutes a day to travel, she'll make it there in time. So this is a very powerful tool. It's a very powerful way to get management on board. So aside from the exam, the way that this is used in the practical application of project management is something like this. Typically, we'll have some project and we'll say, we'll come up with some number and we'll say, okay, the project, we'll use your numbers. Using the simple or triangular method, we came up with 125. Right. And then using the beta or PERT, we had the 122.5 and then the 17. Okay. So typically what we'll do is we'll work with the team. We'll come up with 125 and we'll go to management. We'll say, yeah, this project looks like it's going to take 125 days. And management will say, okay, great, go ahead. And now we have to then go in and work hard to adhere to that 125-day schedule. All right. Now, but what I was taught and what I learned to do and what I'm now paying forward to everyone I teach is that when we learn this stuff, it's like, look, this is actually powerful. Because now if you go back to your client and say, okay, client, talking to, your subject matter experts, whoever they may be, we used a 3-point estimate where we took a pessimistic, optimistic, most likely number. We placed more weight to the most likely number, but then using standard deviations, we have a 68.26 level of confidence, a 95% level of confidence, and a 99% level of confidence. And they're represented by these three numbers. What level of confidence would you like to pick, Mr. or Mrs. Customer? What do you think they always pick?
The highest one.
You would think they usually go with this one here because they see this number and they recognize I'm setting myself up for failure. And then they see the 156 and they're like, I'll go with that. I'll go with the 95. The really good ones, yeah, we'll say 173, but I'll just tell you my experience so far, people go for the 95%. But hey, now check it out. Had you did the 125, the simple estimate that we normally do, and we give them that number, now we got to adhere to 125 days. And even though that probably wasn't feasible, and you go and you complete the project, let's say in 130 days, you now suck. But if you get 156 days and you then go and complete that project in 140 days, you're a hero.
Yeah.
So this is a very, very, very powerful tool to work with your clients, because all of your clients will throw out numbers out there, but they never know. So it's always best to get a minimum, maximum, middle, pessimistic, optimistic, most likely, whatever term you want to use, but get 3 sets and then use that pessimistic minus optimistic divided by 6 to give you a standard deviation and give them confidence intervals. And this will allow clients. Now for you, it'll do 2 things. 1, it'll eliminate stress on the team, stuff like that. Number 2, it'll increase like the satisfaction rate. So now if you have clients who are more satisfied with the delivery and they're like, yeah, man, these guys deliver, they deliver early. Now you get to go, hey, will you write me a LinkedIn review? Or, hey, will you give our company, will you give us a video testimonial so we can put on our page? So that's how powerful this stuff is that you can get a client from going from 125 to accepting 156, delivering at 140, and then getting on camera and telling the world why everyone else ought to use your product. So that's really, you need to know this for the exam, but then also for the practical application, this is how you can like really use it to your advantage.
Totally. Yeah, I can already see that.
And remember, you can do this. We're showing you right now for money, but I explained it in time. So remember, you get to do both, whatever is most powerful. Or if you need to do both, you can do it for time and money.
Oh, okay. Wow.
All right. So you can use it for days, what confidence interval, or you can go by, if you want to get it done this fast, you can start thinking about how many bodies would it take, how many hours. And now you can say, well, we have a 68.26 level of confidence to complete in time. If we use 139 hours, if we use 156 hours, 95 or 173, and now those hours just really mean dollars, right? So now you can get your client again to give you 150, let's just use this $156,000 worth of hours, and you only use $140,000 worth of hours, and you say, you know what, Mr. and Mrs. Client, here's $16K back because we didn't need it, and we're not going to charge you for stuff that we don't need. And now they're going to write big testimonials for you, right? I mean, that's just that's how powerful this stuff is, and it's not used enough. This is not This is not used enough in our industry. I promise you. Sneak it into one project, one little project that you think you can implement it real easily. Like, just go ahead and see how it works. Who knows? It could crash for you. It could not be a good thing. But as I told you earlier, you have to sort of fail your way to success. You have to try little things and see what doesn't work. The beauty of it, though, is that I've done all that for you. So the stuff that I'm recommending is stuff that, like, I know for sure, like, you know, it'll work on the first time and you'll have good results with it. And, you know, that's the advantage of you taking my class now versus like being one of my students in 2012 when I first started. And like, you know, so that's just kind of, or even, because you're taking, who is it? Annie?
And Arcello. Yeah.
So, I mean, even you taking my class now is better than it was the previous class I taught, because I learned one more little thing just from teaching someone, right? So even from the time that I taught and to the time that I'm teaching you, it's like, you know, I'm getting better at it as well. So, you know, do the same for yourself.
Yeah, I've already told one of my friends who's making this a pandemic goal of hers too, and she's excited.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
About me?
Yeah.
All right. I appreciate
I sent her the link. Yeah. And she's really looking forward to it.
All right. You know what? Send me her name. That way I know if she does sign up, because we're starting something in a couple weeks, and I want to provide it to you, which is if you recommend somebody to take the class, they get $100 off. And then when they complete the class, I'll send you $100 check.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
So I want to do that for you, because that, you know, it's sort of like the cost of acquiring a customer, you know, and advertising and all that. It's like, well, shoot, just reverse one for me. I don't have to do all that. I'll just pay you guys that money, right? Give somebody something off and give you something for giving them to me. And then boom, you guys get the money instead of, you know, all the advertisers and the people that make all the other stuff. So
yeah, it's like a real life referral partner marketing.
Yeah, literally.
Or partner referral. Yeah.
Everybody you send $100 and they get $100 off. So
cool. Yeah, I'll send you her name. Yay.
Yeah, because I don't have it implemented yet. That way I can remember and we can do all the stuff on the back end. Okay. And that back end stuff too, I promise won't be like this. This back, I'm so happy that you actually referred me. Thank you for that, because I when we started this off, I kind of felt like, man, Karen, I was like, I really dropped the ball. Like, she didn't get the emails and this and that, and then get her stuff in now. So I really appreciate you being flexible.
Yeah, no problem. I know it was like the timing was very weird. It was like really like literally maybe like midnight that I registered for the class or something. And it was like that week. So I thought that I could like get in, but then it turns out that you weren't having that session. Right. So I think it was just the timing thing, and it's fine.
Okay. All right, now alternatives analysis, we talked about this when we looked at the schedule as well. Like, just, you know, okay, what if we use a different vendor that costs less, right? So that's what alternatives are. And that's where you see the cost impact of different options. And sometimes it's, well, yeah, if we use this person, they're cheaper, but they don't provide a guarantee. So you got to like kind of look at everything. And then reserve analysis, again, we reserve money or we reserve time. So if a team member comes to you and you're asking them for their cost estimates and they're like, yeah, you know, it's usually like 130, but you know, we tend to make a couple mistakes. Let's call it 150. They're padding or they're buffering their estimate, right? If you'd say, you know what, it's $120, but you know, our team has a 4.7% defect rate or error rate, so I'm going to increase it. Now you're reserving, right? So we reserve, team members buffer and pad. And then the cost of quality, we will see this in not the next process, but the process after, when we get to quality management. And it's sort of like there's two categories: conformance, non-conformance, and then internal and external failure costs for non-conformance, appraisal and preventative cost, or preventative and appraisal costs for conformance. And then there's costs for each of those. But even though we haven't gotten to that process, just remember that when you're in planning the process group, you're doing all of them. And so the idea here is that, like, if we're building an iPad, right, we're going to have to spend money breaking this thing. We got to like do a tensile strength and, okay, how much can we press before the screen breaks, right? What's the battery life? We got to submerge it in water. If we put it in water for a second, does it work? 5 seconds, 20 seconds. We got to do all of these things, and that costs money. And that's to ensure that our product will meet its requirements with consistency. And that's where we get the cost of quality there, right? And so we have to take that into account when we estimate our costs as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so quick question. This is like a PMI question, not necessarily a case study. So let's see how you do.
Okay. Okay.
Man, I was trying to I had a brain freeze. I was trying to see like how long that was, but I think you were under 72 seconds. And I want you to recognize that while the text may have been the same, you just answered 2 questions in 72 seconds, and you have 72 seconds per question. So just
Do
trying
they
to,
do that sometimes? Like use the same question and have 2 sets of answers?
yeah. So I was saying like it's rare. I've had like 30 students where you have one
Oh,
question and you have like 2 or 3 questions back to back. In fact, I remember on my exam, I had that for my network schedule diagram questions. I had like 4 or 5 of them. And on each one, they would show me a picture, and then I would have like 2 or 3 questions that pertain just to that picture. But my other 170, 180 questions were all individual. The majority of students that I have, right, the 30, 40 people, but the other, 1,650 people, just they have like me, which is really, and they don't even do that anymore, because when I took my exam, they would show you pictures of network schedule diagrams. They no longer do that. So majority of people just get 200 straight individual questions. So don't expect something like this. But what I'm trying to impress upon you is that you have time. Take your time. You will be able to answer the questions, you know what I mean? Especially using the techniques that I give you. So what'd you come up with for both of these?
for the first one, I got D, and the second one, I got C.
Perfect. Why do you think you got $1 million less for the second one? What's driving that $1 million down?
I don't know.
right here.
The most likely.
We're placing more weight here.
Oh,
So if I
okay.
take these 3 numbers and divide by 3, I get 27. But now that I have 6 numbers and 4 of those numbers are right in the middle, right? It takes away from the 34 and it brings up the 22. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is there ever a scenario where more weight is placed on the other
No, thank goodness.
variables?
Thank goodness. That'd be a lot more to memorize. But no. It's just because most likely is what's going to happen. And remember that this is a technique that was designed by the Navy. So this is the idea of having a submarine and you have, 400 men, 4,000 feet below the sea level where, at any given moment, if that submarine, like the pressure of the water could just boom, crush the submarine, right? So now you got to think about, the minimum maximum most likely in terms of moving from one direction to the next and how much energy and because these are stealth machines. So they only need to come up when they need to come up because as soon as they get to a certain point, now they're visible. Maybe nobody's looking, but if somebody catches them, like, oh, the US has a stealth thing right there. We know it's there, right? At some point, it's going to go away and it's going to go away from our radar, but we know in the vicinity where it's at. So because of that, they only want to come up at the right time. So they want to have a 99.73 level of confidence that when they're like, at what they're doing. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, now let's build this thing out. Let's determine the budget. So this is how we're going to create the baseline. We're going to aggregate, and that's a PMI term, cost aggregation there. So that's a tool and technique, though. That's the PMI term. Don't forget that. We're going to aggregate the money together, roll them all up. And then we're going to get a baseline that's going to be approved, right? An approved version, right? It'll include our contingency reserves, but it excludes management reserves. And we're going to talk about that right now, right? And that's the difference between a project budget and a cost baseline.
Okay.
Right? So do you remember what the scope baseline, what 3 documents make that?
The scope statement, WBS and WBS dictionary.
Yes. All right. Schedule baseline. What is a schedule baseline? You don't have to use like specific terms, but I mean, is it a detailed schedule? Is it a high level schedule? Is it like if you just had to describe it in your own words, what's a schedule baseline compared to the project schedule?
Oh, schedule baseline is the detailed schedule.
So backwards.
Oh, okay.
Always remember the schedule baseline is what you give the customer and management. That's what I tell people, and that usually helps them to remember. Yeah, I don't really give out full detailed project schedules with, activity names and who's doing it to management or to the client. That's usually for the team. We give them like a milestone schedule or some high level schedule.
Okay.
I don't know if that's the case with what you're doing, because sometimes it's not the case. Like sometimes just by the nature of the work, everybody gets a detailed schedule. So if that's the case, then for the next 3 weeks, only the team sees, only you and the team work with that very detailed schedule. Management, clients, customers, they get schedule baselines, sort of high level or modified approved versions they can sign off on. And here's the reason why. I don't want my sponsor to sign off on activities, because now if I decide that I want to employ a lead or a lag, speed something up, start it sooner, or slow it down, start it later, or change an activity or change a resource, I don't want to have to go back and go through change control for that.
I see.
All right. So my schedule's for me and how we're going to build it. The schedule that the team needs to adhere to, that's the baseline. That's for the company. That's deliverable based, not necessarily activity based. Maybe that helps. The deliverable based schedule is more of the schedule baseline. When will we get stuff done? An activity based schedule is more of the project schedule, and that's what your team members use.
Got it.
Okay, so now we're going to create the cost baseline. All right, and we see that here. We'll also get funding requirements, potentially some updates. We could update our estimates as we're aggregating numbers. Who knows? We'll use expert judgment, cost aggregation, and data analysis. We've seen those. Historical information review and funding limit reconciliation. I'll talk about that in addition to financing. And we'll use these slew of documents. So let's jump in. So your cost baseline, it's approved. It's used to authorize funds. Now I want you to notice something right here. I want you to notice how this project budget, we don't own that. That's not us. We don't own that because it contains management reserves. Okay. I shouldn't block out the word. It's not what I mean to do, but I mean, it contains management reserves. Okay. Now, as we were going through this project, we estimated activities in the previous process. And then we said, let's do some reserve analysis because some of these activities have some risk. We might not do them right the first time. Some materials or supplies might not be right. So we'll do that. Then when we got to this process, each of those activities that had their risk reserves rolled up to some work package, maybe if you're having work packages. But if they didn't, after we added everything up together, we put money on top of that. Now, some people are like, no, you can't double dip. Here's the idea. Let's say this is a PMP training classroom that we're building. And so I've got to have like all kinds of stuff, right? Like microphones, speakers, all kinds of stuff, right? Okay. So I may estimate each activity out and say, okay, microphone costs so much, lighting costs so much, cameras cost so much. And then I use that for each of those activities. I come up with that number and now I have estimates for all of these deliverables. And then I say, well, but you know what? What happens if they install the system wrong? That might take a few more days, right? Because you have individual sound, lighting, video, but together they work as a system. So now if that system is not working, or it could be that I'm getting this materials from the East Coast because they're cheaper than to get it from the West Coast. However, if we get some sort of delay, I am now going to have to cancel that order and buy it at a higher price here locally so that we can adhere to our schedule. And then that's the case. That's where the second sort of reserves come in. So in construction, we sort of call this allocated reserves and unallocated reserves, right? You'll have like a pot of money that's specific to plumbing, to electrical packages, to finishes, right? Then you'll have contingency money that's just for the entire project, right? If any one of those aspects goes over their contingency, we have a little bit more. So that's the idea. Now that you've got all of that, you may have a WBS or control accounts. But if you don't, that entire number, right? You had your little estimates and you got this. That entire number is now reflected here in the cost baseline. We as project managers own this. We own this cost baseline, right? Meaning that we're accountable to hit these numbers. We've estimated them with our teams. We know what the money is for. Now, the management reserves kick in for the unknown. So this is sort of like, we did a bad implementation, or we implemented on the wrong server, something like that, right? And okay, this is a risk. This could have happened. Customer had like 50 and we're only supposed to do it on these 47, but we did it on one of them wrong. Okay, we can account for that. It should be part of that should be somewhere within your contingency reserves. You'd account for some mistakes. It should be there within your cost baseline. You're accountable for that. But now let's say there's a strike on BART and we didn't know that. It wasn't like in the news we've heard of conflicts between management and the union or anything like that. Everything's going smooth. And then I look to go to work on Tuesday, BART's not running. And now 40% of our workforce cannot make it into the office. Well, we can't account for that within our cost baseline. So if that's the case, management reserves kicks in for that. And management usually doesn't say, Karin, when you do your next implementation, I just want you to know that way you can feel comfortable and sleep better at night that we're putting aside 20% of whatever your project costs are. We're just going to put it aside just in case something happens to your project. Sleep better knowing that we got that for you. Does your company do that for you? Because if they do, send me an application right now. Okay.
Never heard of that.
Never heard of that. They don't do that. In fact, the only places that I know of that are in the banking industry. And even then, the portfolio managers will reveal to the program managers how much money is there. They kind of have to, but the program managers never tell the individual project managers how much program reserve they have. So if a particular project goes over budget, they can spend that, right? They never say that. They're never going to tell you, because that's an incentive for you to not get your job done, right? So that's just the idea that we as project managers own the cost baseline. So here's how you can remember that. The cost baseline starts with a C and it contains contingency reserves. C and C, we own that. The project budget contains management reserves and it's owned by management, M&M, all right? So contingency reserves equal to cost baseline, or contingency reserves contained within the cost baseline. We own that as PMs. Management reserves inside the project budget, management owns that. So I know we typically say, oh, what's the budget? What's the budget on projects? And that's how we talk about it for the next couple of weeks while you're studying the exam. What you typically know as your budget is really just a cost baseline. We never really know the budget because that's up to both the customer and management, right? The customer can determine how much more money they want to spend, and management will determine how much more money they want to spend. Does that make sense? So here's different types of, these are called S curves, right? I know it says time-based curve, but these are also known as S curves. And you can see on the chart, it's not a true S, but you can kind of see, all right, you have some projects that in the beginning, they don't have, very low spend. And then at the end, there's a huge spend and then it tapers off. And when you see projects like that, typically they purchase some sort of like software, some sort of license or something. And then that's where all the money went. Or inversely, they bought the license up front and then the work happens and then labor is just like, $1 million license with $100,000 worth of labor. So then you can see how you huge spike, but then the uptick is very gradual, versus a gradual uptick and then a huge spike and then back to a gradual uptick, right? You have the incremental, spend a little bit, spend a little bit, spend a little bit, right? So those are different variations of the S curve. And then you get funding requirements that say, I need money at this day, at this time. Basically saying, okay, if I have $1 million project and I have 4 quarters to complete in a year, and you want to give me $250,000 a quarter, well, guess what? I actually need $300,000 in Q2, but I only need $200,000 in Q1, right? And so that's where we look at funding limit reconciliation. Where is that? That's the key term and technique. So I went ahead of myself, but so that's where you get there. So let me go back. So on the S curve can kind of show you the limits just because of where you see there. So I just wanted to mention that. But different types of S curves. Okay. Now we use the plan in order to come up with the stuff. We use the plan, cost management plan, resource management plan, and the scope baseline, WBS dictionary, scope statement. We use those as inputs. We also use any other project documents, right? Especially any agreements, because while we estimated costs in the last process, we have to add those and aggregate them to the contracts, the materials, the supplies, the things that we've already paid for, machines that we might want to rent, stuff that we've already signed for. We got to add all those up. So we need to take those business documents into account as well. And then we also see agreements that we take into account. I just mentioned those contracts, etc. Then we aggregate, or we add them all up. Pretty much it. Don't overthink it. Cost aggregation, we're just gonna add them all up, okay? And then we'll do some analysis, double check, measure twice. Do we have enough contingency and management reserves? And then funding limit reconciliation, I just described that. It's the idea that, okay, let's make sure that the amount of money we get is gonna coincide with the amount of work that needs to be done in this particular period. Okay. So contingency reserves, identified risk. When we get to risk, the risk section, I'll talk about the unknown knowns, the unknown unknowns, known knowns, and known unknowns. Have you heard that before?
No, I have not.
The person who, if you watch, is it Cheney or Rumsfeld? Who shot dude in the face with a shotgun? Is that Cheney? That was Cheney, right?
I don't remember. I mean, I don't even know. It
was one of those two. Anyways, it was one of those. So whoever was the Secretary of Defense for Bush at the time was on a hunting trip with someone and like shot his friend in the face with the shotgun. He didn't kill him, right? Because
Oh my,
yeah,
I'm gonna have to look that up.
yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. And there's like talk that like that might not have been an accident, but I don't even want to go there. I don't want to go there. I wasn't there. But I'm bringing that up to say that this was the time that when we were going to war with Iraq, and they said weapons of mass destruction were there, WMDs, and it was like, okay, he came out and gave this brilliant talk, right? I'm not talking about the fact that he was talking about war, but I'm just talking about the substance and how he delivered it and like how he used the analogies. It was a really good one. So if you go watch, it's like a 12-minute thing where he comes on to talk to American people and he says, look, there's known knowns, things that we know that we know. There's known unknowns. There's things that we know that we don't know, right? Like I know that I don't know how long it would take me to walk to San Francisco from Walnut Creek. I have no idea, right? That's a known unknown. But then there's unknown knowns. I have no idea that, let's say I have no idea that I actually know how to crochet, right? Maybe somebody hands me something and says, hey, you do this, and I start doing it, and it's like, oh, you're a natural. That's an unknown known. I had no idea that I knew how to do that so easily, right? And then there's the unknown unknowns, the things that we don't know that we don't know, okay? So contingency reserves are for identified risk or for known unknowns, things that we know we don't know. Like we know somebody's going to make a mistake. We just don't know when and what the impact's going to be. We know somebody's going to be late. We know all of these different things. We just don't know when it's going to happen, right? Management reserves kick in for the unknown unknowns. We don't know that we don't know that BART is going to have a strike next Wednesday, right? It's just not a right. Now, if today we look and we see management and union, like I said earlier, and we see BART's whoever that dude is, like he's their representative, he's out talking and he's doing his thing and he's looking good in public and making people feel good about it because like, hey, be on our side, not on union side. Now, if we see that, that becomes a known unknown. We know something's about to happen. We just don't know when it's going to happen, right? So unknown unknowns, management reserves, like acts of God. You'll see this in contracts, an act of God, and then even that in California, earthquakes are known unknowns. Okay, we know something's going to happen. We just don't know when it's going to come. So if an earthquake comes and it damages your home, did you have earthquake insurance? Because your homeowner's insurance will not cover that. Okay. Now, if we get a hurricane here, even a category 3, we're going to go nuts and our insurance would kick in because that'd be an unknown. Like we don't get hurricanes here. But now on the flip side, if you're in Florida, category 3, they laugh at you. They're like, man, category 5, I'm still walking out the streets, right? They're used to that. And if it comes, you better have insurance. You better have hurricane insurance because if you don't, all right, that's a known unknown over there. But if an earthquake comes, levels your home in Florida, you don't need earthquake insurance because those don't happen out there and those are built in, right? So that's kind of like the idea of the known unknown versus the unknown unknown. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm going to let that sink, but yeah, I think it makes sense.
All right, here we go.
Okay. Okay.
All right. What method of estimating did the team use?
I'm gonna say A.
Why?
I actually didn't catch that part, so I'm just
That's fair.
guessing.
Which one can you eliminate?
Projected estimating.
Good. So you know when that is between A, B, and C. Okay.
Yeah, and I can eliminate analogous because I didn't see a reference of like a historical project.
Okay. Which likely means that you can eliminate parametric because you need historical data for that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So the beautiful thing about this, let's see how you do. But the beautiful thing about this is an example of how you ace the exam. You don't need to know what the right answer is. You just need to know what it's not. You know it ain't B. You didn't hear anything about historical, so you're like, it can't be B. And you're like, and if there's no historical, then it can't be C. I'm gonna choose A, and you move on.
Okay.
Whoa, sorry about that.
Just as long as you're alive.
Man, eyes are our eyes are. Good Lord. Don't eat oatmeal and teach at the same time.
Oh my goodness. Everything okay?
Just went down the wrong. Hey, can you see that? Man, I made my eyes water. Good Lord. I'm hot now. Woo!
Oh my gosh.
All right. At least we can laugh about it. All right. Number 2, what type of reserve did the team use to factor in the increased risk of needing to use higher cost consultants?
So I didn't know the answer to this one, but I'm just gonna guess management reserve.
Why?
Wait, I want to see management reserve because I feel like management has the budget to hire people, but then at the same time, I want to choose contingency reserve because it's an unknown known. So they have that type of budget reserved for hiring additional resources.
Pick one.
I'll just say B.
Okay. And then what type of reserve would be included to account for the occurrences when future work is identified that is not in the schedule but is within the project scope? I don't like the way that's written, but basically, what type of reserves would be included to account for occurrences where future work that we didn't know about popped up and it's still within the job that we're supposed to do?
A.
Okay. Fat thumbs. I gotta stop doing that. So we had A, we had B, and we had A, I think, right?
Yep.
Okay, let's see how we did. Boom, ABA.
Oh, I got it.
Mm-hmm. So that is your
Cool.
process. Here's the deal. You are going to know 60% of the exam, more than likely, very confidently. When you come to the exam, and when I say 60%, you're going to know 100% in your head, but 60% of the questions you're going to be able to answer with confidence. The other 40% is going to be like, oh, I don't really know. And if you use these techniques like I show you, the other 50% or the other 40%, you more than likely will be better than 50% of that 40%, meaning you should at least get 20% of that 40. 20% plus the 60%, it's going to give you 80. That's well enough to pass. Okay.
Okay.
And so here, I liked how you mentioned, well, it sounds like only management will be able to do it, but it's a known unknown. Good. It's a known unknown. So you just go with whatever PMI says. Management could do it, but PMI says if it's a known unknown, the PM should be responsible for it. You should be able to account for it in your contingency reserves. And then when you got here and you saw that, oh, it's not in the schedule, but it's in the scope and we didn't know about it. Okay, management, that should solidify your choice for this one here. So you're already well on your way. This is how you pass the exam. It's like literally, doing all this. Like, I'm very confident everybody, they absorb all the material, like they know how to use it, but how do you pass the exam? And you're already on your way. Very happy about that.
Awesome.
All right, so last process to do. This is good. If we were on day 2, this is where we would have ended before lunch. So we're right on target. This is good. All right, so quality management. And I usually make people hungry right before this section because I talk about McDonald's. I use the same, for this one, I use the same example for every class. So let me ask you, McDonald's, highest quality burger in the world. You believe that statement? McDonald's is the highest quality burger in the world, hands down, and every burger company is chasing them.
I think it depends on what your definition of quality is.
Okay, what's your definition of quality?
I really like McDonald's personally, but I think in terms of like the quality and like its consistency across all of the locations, it's a very high quality.
That is it. See, when you say it depends on what my definition of quality is, it's like, yeah, I know what you mean. It's just that in real life, when I say real life, just everyday life, we as people, as humans, we do not separate quality and grade. We mash them together. So we think of high grade stuff as being high quality, and we think of high quality stuff as being high grade. High grade and high quality just mean the same thing. We just sort of mash them together. But they're not. Okay, so McDonald's, highest quality burger in the world, because barring the time it would take me to travel to Tokyo, or the single McDonald's that the city and county of San Francisco allows you to have there, yeah, my burger would be the same. It would be cooked to the same temperature. Their meat, they order meat from like only 1 or 2 vendors, so like the type of meat's going to be consistent. In fact, even the amount of ketchup you get, because I can't go to this McDonald's because, ooh, the people there, they put in extra ketchup. Nope, because they have a thing that you squeeze it. And it's not that when you squeeze it, it's, ketchup is coming out. It's that when you squeeze it and when it gets to a certain point, click, and then 3 blobs of ketchup come out. The same 3 blobs are going to come out regardless of who's squeezing that thing. So now the amount of ketchup on my bun, the amount of secret sauce, right? All of that is going to be delivered with consistency. Okay, that's the idea. Now I can, I have like there must be like an oatmeal flake stuck in my, anyways. Now when we talk about, let's say I could go to, I don't know, I could go to the city and go to Super Duper Burger, something like that. I could go to like some chain, some local chain, some mom and pop shop, forget a chain, but a mom and pop shop. And I could get a grass-fed Kobe beef burger, all, organic, range-free, on a, with organic arugula on a gluten-free bun. Okay. Very high grade burger. However, if I, and I could go to the same day at the same time, same cooks, everything, and ask my burger to be medium. And some days my burger would be medium rare. Some days it will be medium well. Some days I will get 14 pieces of arugula. Some days I will get 8. No consistency. My burger might be high grade and it might taste great, but it's going to be different every single time. So for PMI, they say for projects mandate that we want consistency over anything else. Low grade is fine as long as it's consistent. So I'll give you another example of this. You're here in the Bay, you're from the Bay. So you remember when they were replacing the eastern span of the Bay Bridge. And I don't know if you remember the controversy over the nuts and the bolts of the bridge.
No, I don't.
Okay, so there was some controversy with like the tensile strength of those nuts and bolts.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I can produce a nut and a bolt that if the temperature drops below freezing, it will not contract more than 1/100th of a millimeter. And if the temperature rises to above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, it will not expand more than 100th of a millimeter. And Department of Transportation can say the standard needs to be that if something hits freezing, this thing should not contract more than 5/100th of a millimeter. And if it gets to over 100 degrees, it should not expand more than 5/100th of a millimeter. Okay. Now I can produce 5 types of bolts. I can produce one that expands 1 each way, 2 each way, 3 each way, 4 each way, 5 each way. All 5 of those things will meet the requirements with consistency. Therefore, they are high quality. But now you have 4 grades of nuts and bolts. The one that'll expand and contract 5 each way, that's the minimum standard for the Department of Transportation. I can charge you $1 per nut and bolt. But the one that will only expand and contract 1/100th of a millimeter, I can charge you like $1.99 per bolt because that's a higher grade. Both have high quality. This one's just slightly higher grade. So that's the idea from PMI about grade and quality.
I see.
All right. So when we're looking here at quality, we are concerned with the work needs that need to figure out how do we do this thing so that every unit reproduced will be the same. Okay. So that's sort of like when Karen does her projects, how does she do it so that every client gets the same great experience with her? All right. So you have your own set ways of how you choose to communicate and work with people so that they all have a great experience with you. All right. So that's the idea of quality. It's consistent. Every single person will get the same type of great level of service from Karen. Now, you might then get a client that your company comes back and it says, hey, Karen, I need you to give these people the white glove treatment. I need you to really go out your way and do everything that you know that they desire. This is going to be a good client. They might bring us more business. Well, if that's the case, then your quality will still be high because you're still going to satisfy them the same way you would satisfy everybody else. But the grade of service that they're going to get from you might be higher. Instead of an email, they might get a phone call from you. Right? So that's just kind of the idea is like, you know, the level of communication, the level of touch points, the level of service, the grade will be higher. All right. So we're trying to figure out when we plan quality, what are the different metrics that we need to look at and focus on so that way we're performing with a standard that will be consistent across the board. So we're trying to figure that out, and that's what quality planning is about. So we look at the nature of the project because that's going to help us out. And we always want to remember, this will be a question on the exam too. PMI is all about prevention over inspection. They say it's going to cost you a lot of money to prevent the mistakes rather than going and inspecting them and then fixing them later. Because that's rework anyways, right? You did it twice. So just do it right the first time. All right. So we have the plan is what we're trying to get, and the metrics. Those are the 2 distinct outputs here. We may get updates to the documents. We may get updates to our approach. Man, okay. I'm never eating oatmeal again when I teach a class because that was all right. We can use tools and techniques. We've seen expert judgment. We've seen data gathering. Now we see this benchmarking that I was mentioning earlier. So we'll see that. All right. We'll use these tools and techniques on these inputs. All right. So our plan is going to describe all the activities and resources that will be necessary to do this thing. All right. Means, you know, who the people are, what tools we need to use. This is the idea. Do you follow football? No. Okay.
Well, I know like the rules and stuff. I don't know what's going on right now because.
Okay. But okay. Yeah. So you remember, do you remember a couple of years ago, the whole Tom Brady scandal? And it's like, oh, was he deflating the footballs? Was he having people take air out?
Yeah. Deflategate.
Okay. So do you know why he got out of Deflategate? He was ultimately suspended, but it went to arbitrary. He lost, and then he got it overturned. And very rarely do arbitration cases get overturned. It was like 4 and 136, and then he became 5 and 137. But then they overturned it back, so then it was back to 4 over 137. But the reason why he won the first time was because there was no standards, meaning he played that game in Denver, and then they went the next week and they played, I think, the game in Tennessee. And when they measured the balls in Denver that was at a higher altitude, they used an analog, like an analog gauge that you just put it in and you read it. And then when they tested it again in Tennessee, cross country, much lower elevation, they used a digital reader. So it's like, well, if you guys use an analog reader, how do we know that the person, if it's on this line, saw it over here or saw it over there? And how do we know that this analog reader is giving us one number and then your digital reader is giving us another number? His lawyer was brilliant. It was just really easy to prove that you guys were not consistent in how you did it. That therefore the data of the quality of your data is very bad. Therefore, we cannot take your data into account to prove that anything was, that there was any wrongdoing.
I see.
Very, very, very simple. But eventually it got overturned again because the rules within the collective bargaining agreement between the union or the players and management was that they all gave the commissioner, Roger Goodell, the power to suspend anyone for any reason that he sees fit. So his reason was like, well, we were investigating you. I asked you to turn over your cell phone, and then you deleted everything off your cell phone. Like, nobody does that. So I don't trust you. So it's part of the law, so they're able to do it. But technically speaking, we cannot definitively say that the balls were not inflated to the right level because the quality of the data was low. Why? Because they used different standards. That's a part of it. Like, you can't use an analog watch and then your husband uses a digital watch. And then you can't tell me a minute and a half and then he tells me 90 seconds. Technically, it's the same thing, but you've used two different tools and you've given me two different metric types. So the idea is that, we've got to have some sort of standards and objectives. And that's what we're doing here.
I see.
Okay. So the metrics describe the product attribute and how we will verify it, meaning if you do an implementation, there should be like some sort of uptime. There should be some sort of like after you test, some sort of result. And whenever you test, whether it's a network connection, whether it's, how many, pinging time, whether it's uptime, there's going to be some metric that lets us know that this deliverable is being produced. So it's the idea that, yeah, here we've implemented this into your environment. Every time you guys turn it on, it starts up in less than the time, whether it's 8 seconds, 3 seconds, it does everything it's supposed to do. We can put a very complicated workflow into it and it still performs the way it needs to do. So that's the idea, is like, let's put this thing under stress. Let's see what happens. And if it holds up to the metrics, then we know it meets its requirements with consistency. Okay. And so you have different examples of that that you see there on the screen, but these are questions on the exam. So like, let me ask you in your projects, like, what are some metrics that you guys look at?
Time to go live, customer satisfaction.
Yep.
The revenue, like their fully ramped revenue.
Okay. So, I mean, it should be easy for you. I wouldn't say easy, but it doesn't sound like it's going to be difficult for you to identify what metrics are. And because sometimes people manage projects and they don't, like, if you manage service project, let's say you, well, no, everything has a metric, but there just are some people like within their projects that they don't have, they don't have metrics that they capture. I mean, project management is a very, very broad term. You can have a project manager that makes 40K and you get a project manager that makes 400K. So, I mean, it's just very broad. So,
yeah.
All right. So the key outputs here, we want to create a quality management plan. And so in order to do that, we may need to update the risk management plan. There may be a risk to the approach that we're going to do this implementation. There may be a risk to the fact that, maybe this company's infrastructure it's right at the limits of its infrastructure. What we're going to put in, is there, and they may not have a great experience. So, we may have to think about a different implementation approach, maybe, slightly, less memory or bandwidth or compute, load onto this particular instance. Who knows? I'm making it up, but I think you get what I'm trying to say, is that in order to achieve high quality, sometimes we have to then go back and modify our scope, and then, make updates to what's actually a risk now. All right. And we also may update some other documents, especially the requirements traceability matrix, because again, for the exam, those requirements usually trace back to an owner or source, usually to some test case or evaluation system, which is part of quality, right? Or some business value. So the traceability matrix will get updated. And then you need the charter, obviously, has high level information. The scope baseline, WBS dictionary, and scope statement, which tells you how we're doing something, what we're not doing, well, what we're doing, what we're not doing, how we're doing it, and how we'll get sign off. So if it's to spray, brush, or roll the paint, we need to know that. We'll take EES and OPAs into account, especially government regulations. We got to think about that. And, that's part of your world. So you think about those things, the rules, the standards that would be specific to the application area. And you told me about a client you guys had where you had to look at the Mexican law. That goes there. That's EES. Outside of your control, you just got to sort of, play within it. The OPAs also you'll take into account. And then you kind of do the same tools and techniques we've seen and gather information. Benchmark, right? Your benchmark is that your company sets is likely like that go to live. That may be set from like, okay, what are other companies doing, right? How much time till we go live? How do other companies do this? And we want to be the best. And if there's not other companies, we're the first company out there, then let's look at other industries and see what they do. And let's try to come up with some sort of benchmark. So that's the idea there. You'll analyze other data, meaning do a cost benefit analysis. Well, if we were to implement a system where we can do this in 10 days, we may have a 10% defect rate. But if we can do it in 9 days, we might get a 14% defect rate. But looking at those 2 days, what's the cost benefit of that, right? So you may look at something like that. We saw multi-criteria decision analysis and sort of like multiple options, pick a choice, and then make sure your choice was right. You have data representation. This is basically just putting it on a screen or a chart or a diagram so that somebody can see it. That's what data representation is, right? And then test and inspection planning, right? While that's a tool and a technique, the output, we will get test and inspection plans. So just remember that for the exam, like there's test and inspection planning. All right, let's go back here. Did they take this out for version 6? Yes, they did, because it's just going to be quality metrics now, excuse me. So you don't have to memorize those two things anymore. Okay, so data gathering, I talked about that. Just benchmarking and brainstorming, interviews, different things, a way to capture that information. The cost benefit analysis, look at the strengths and weaknesses, kind of do like a SWOT analysis and see, what we should and shouldn't do. And now let's talk about the cost of conformance, right? So you need to be able to see this chart in your head, right? The cost of your product conforming to its requirements and the cost of it not conforming. The cost of it conforming is split up into preventative and appraisal cost. And then the cost of non-conformance is internal and external failure cost, right? So to make something conform or meet its requirements with consistency, the best thing I can do is I can train all of my people. Give them the right training. Don't just throw them to the fire. I can then document the processes. I can give them a guide and a manual. I can have processes documented on the wall about what they need to do just in case they forget. Okay. Then I need to give them the right equipment. I got to give them the best tools that they can use. And then I got to give them time to do it right. Quit asking people to do more with less and in a short amount of time, right? So I give you all the time in the world. I got all the processes laid out on the wall so that you can see. I've trained you up and I gave you the best tools. That should prevent the majority of errors that happen. But now we're all human and nobody is perfect. We will make mistakes. we now need to appraise our products. So now think when a home gets appraised, right? You're buying a house or condo or whatever it may be, and you're appraising this location, okay? So now you'll go in, you'll walk at the house, you'll go and inspect, right? We see testing, destructive testing loss, inspecting. Someone will walk around and inspect the perimeter of the house. Are there any cracks to the foundation? They'll look in the attic, inspect the attic. Do we see any evidence of water leaks, right? You will test. You will turn on the shower and then maybe turn on some other sinks and faucets and see, does the water pressure go down? If I flush a toilet, will does water get hot and burn my back or something like that? All right, we'll do that type of testing. Can I turn on all the lights, make sure the refrigerator's running, turn on the microwave, plug in a vacuum? Do I pop a circuit? All right, so that's sort of the testing. And then in projects, we go a little bit further. Here's a destructive testing. We got tensile strength. Right? You put something down on this, and then the harder you press it and see, when will it crack? When will the screen break? Will it hold up? We do a drop test, right? 1 feet, 2 feet, 3 feet, and we'll drop it and see at what point, how far can you drop this? How high can you drop this? And the product still maintains its integrity, right? So all of that costs money, but it's money spent to avoid failures. It's the cost of quality. When we are estimating cost, we think about the cost of conformance and we take that into account, right? It's going to cost us so much money to break iPads and test them and all this stuff, right? Now, the cost of non-conformance, we don't necessarily put this into our contingency reserves, but we know that it's there, right? So rework and scrap, we can put aside reserve analysis, say if we make some mistakes. So just remember, for PMI, we don't do it over. We don't make things right. We don't get another chance. We don't fix it. We rework it. You got to use that PMI term, okay? And we don't throw stuff away or put it in the garbage or toss it. We scrap it, right? So rework and scrap are the only two terms that you want to use for internal failure costs. And here's what this means. Okay, we trained everybody up. We put the processes up. We gave them the best tools, and we gave them all the time in the world to do it right? And we thought that was going to work. Then as we were testing and inspecting, we realized that they made mistakes. And so some of those mistakes, we were able to rework them because it's still in our hands. It's not in the customer's hands. And some of the mistakes we have to scrap it, which is the worst kind, because now we got to use new material and new labor. Where at least in rework, we can use this old material plus new labor and sort of fix it. All right. But either way, that's much higher. It's much higher for me to build something and then go fix it than it is to just build it right the first time. All right. So that's internal failure cost. It's inside your team's hands. They have found it. But now if I'm building these iPads and they get out of my team's hands and they get into the customer's hands, now I'm going to have liabilities, meaning people are going to start suing. Think about all the class action lawsuits for the automobile industry, stuck accelerators and things like that. You can have lawsuits. You have warranty work. I mean, now that costs money because now Apple sent me a bad iPad. I need a new one. Now they've got to ship me a new one, pay for the shipping. And when they paid for that, they had to send me a box with another label. So they have to pay for me to ship the old one to them. Then they have to pay to spin up some facility to receive these items. They have to pay more people to go in and see exactly what's wrong because you can never trust what the customer says. You got to actually go figure it out yourself. And then we got to refurbish that stuff. And then we're going to go back and sell it. But now it's going to be sold at a discount. It's going to be sold at we're just trying to recoup losses. So we're going to sell it as a refurbished unit for maybe 70% of what the price would be. That's expensive. Mm-hmm. And by the way, if that happens enough to a company, people will just stop buying and you get the lost business. All right. So that's the idea of external failure costs is the biggest expense to a company because now the defects is in the customer's hands. All right. And it's just really bad. If it's still in our hands, we can rework it or we can scrap it. But it's really better if we test it and inspect it and find those things first. But it's even better if we just build a quality product from the get-go, and we give people enough time, we give them the best tools, we document all the processes, and we train them how to do it the right way. So this is the cost of quality. You need to see this in your head, right? Because you will get several questions on exam. Expect about between 7 to 14 questions on this chart on the exam.
Okay, got it.
So when you represent this data that we're seeing from this, you can use flow charts, process maps, and then, these are just like CIPOC, there's TCOP, TECOP, PESTLE, political, environmental, I forgot what the S is, PSTLE, technical, there's safety, but there's these different prompts that you can use to then go in and see. All right, logical data models, visually representing the data, and then a matrix diagram. All right, and so this is where we'll see a matrix diagram when we get to risk as well. We'll see a lot more diagrams in risk that talk about some of the ones that we were looking about here in planning. So, and then decision making, multi-criteria decision analysis. We talked about that fancy term. Break it down from PMI. Multi-criteria, more than one choice. Decision, pick something. Analysis. Go back and double check and make sure that what you used to pick is the right thing.
Mhm.
Right? And testing and inspection planning. That's another sort of tool and technique for us. So, okay, let's now case study and we'll wrap the day up.
Cool.
Oops, sorry.
Could you go back, CJ, please? Thanks.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
All right, so John's use of best practices from similar projects to help define the statistical sampling and audit plan was an example of what data gathering technique?
C.
Okay. And the new government regulations are defined as what type of input for plan quality management?
B.
Okay, and the team use what type of analysis to evaluate the cost effectiveness of an increased investment in cost of conformance?
B.
Sweet. I think you got them all. Yep.
Yay.
Good. When we when we find something else, I'm looking at the first one, right? He used best practices. That's when you know, okay, yep, we're setting a benchmark, we're setting a goal. We want to achieve this. Government regulations always EEFs, and cost benefit analysis. What are the costs to the benefits? So pretty good. So we'll come back tomorrow, and in our 5 hours, we should finish all of planning tomorrow. So when we start the day, I'll start with sort of a 20-minute recap, and I'll take us on the story that brings us the journey from the moment we signed the charter all the way to now we've planned quality management. And then we'll finish all of planning. And then if we do that, I'm pretty confident we can. Then on Tuesday, you'll get another recap in the beginning that takes you the full story. And it takes me about 15 minutes to do, 8 to 15 minutes. And the full one is 15 minutes. And then I'll basically talk through entire planning, the entirety of initiation and planning. And hopefully that helps you. And then we'll move on from there. We'll have next Tuesday, Thursday. The following Saturday will likely finish up. And then you will take your exam that Saturday or Sunday morning, depending on how you want to do that. So when we get close to next week, to next weekend, we'll have to sort of kind of figure this out, because on the last day of our class, the first half, you take the exam, and then the second half, we go over the exam in its entirety. And then I release the class, and those people that want to stay and get help with their application, I do it that way. So because it's just me and you at this point, you're not going to take your exam in class, and we don't need to necessarily like sort of meet like this for you to take your exam. So we'll figure out how to best do it. And we might even be able to modify some timing, because that's 4 hours in class that you normally would have. I still built it into this, but you're going to just do those 4 hours. Like, I'm not going to sit here staring at the screen while you're doing your, you know what I mean? So I'm just giving you a heads up that next weekend we may finish up a little bit earlier, like 4 hours earlier, just because we didn't need that section. But I will commit that other time for as much as you need to, like, if you have questions, you're going to work on some stuff or something like that. So we'll be able to do a little bit something special for them.
Okay, cool. So would that be like the free time if I need help with the application process and like,
Absolutely.
that 500 word description thing? I just want to make sure that, like you said, that it's like they want to see like PMI terminology in there. So I think I need some help with that part.
Absolutely. And even just so you know, like, that's part of the class like typically in an in-person class, I would help people with their application, but really at the end, I would just describe what to do and this and that. And then they go off and do it. And then the next week or so, we're corresponding with emails back and forth. So just know that even when the class ends, our relationship doesn't end. Like, right. You're like, I'm still going to help you. And we're going to, even after that day, you're going to have questions. You're going to email me. If you want any tutoring, if any questions, I'm here. And then once you pass your PMP exam, you're still gonna have questions, because everybody does, and they ask me and this and that. I'm still here. So yeah, no. Karna, I will be in your life as long as you will have me.
Awesome. Yeah, because that part, because you know how I do implementation projects. I have like 15 projects simultaneously, so I don't necessarily know how to track that in an application. So I'm like having a hard time wrapping my head around that piece.
You know what? Let's talk about this real quick for 2 minutes. And then maybe you can write one today, and then after class tomorrow, I can take a look at it. And then when we come back Tuesday, I'll have something for you, or I'll just email it to you. And then by Tuesday, we might have some updates. So one of the things that you may be able to do is, if you have multiple implementations for a same client, do you have anything like that?
I have, like, at my job like 2 years ago. Yeah, a lot of those, like add-ons and things like that.
Those you can kind of combine, right? Instead of making them separate projects, you can just make one big project and give the client name as a project. And then I had to do X, Y, and Z, and each project is a deliverable.
Yes.
And I will help you with that, because that's technically PMI might view it as a program. So I'll help you figure out how to write that as just a single project. So that's one thing I help people with. Cause like I had someone similar, instead of implementations, they work for a company that replaces windows for apartment buildings and sky rises. So their projects only last, but 6 to 10 weeks. So he has all these projects and he was like, how can I, get away from not having to submit? Because let's say you get audited and you got 42 projects, that's 42 signatures you got to collect. Even if they're from the same person, they have to sign every single one. So it's like, okay, that's one thing we did is we said, okay, how many of these are just single clients? And we found out that, many times you would have one client or like one investment group that owned 6 or 7 of those buildings. And it's like, okay, great. That is a project, right? We can sort of combine it there. So I'll look for things like that for you.
Okay.
What I want you to do, right? Well, I'm telling you that right now. And what I want you to do is try to write one. If just write one, don't spend a whole lot of time. Don't try to be, very detailed with it. Just come up with 550 characters that say, what did you do to initiate your project, to plan it, to execute it, to monitor, control, and close. And we may even, if it turns out that it takes you more than 5 minutes tonight, then stop and wait until after tomorrow's session. Because once we're done with all of planning, you pretty much have all of PMI speak. Because then execution is just following the plan. Monitoring, controlling is just looking at the execution compared to the plan, and then closing is one process. There's not a whole lot of new stuff that PMI has in those, right? In terms of like tools and techniques, and it's just the names of the processes. But for the most part, in planning is where you learn everything. So I'm a little back and forth. I think, just from the limited time we've spent and just talking to, I think you've got enough chops, like enough intelligence already that you could probably just write it. But if in a couple minutes it's like, it's just struggling, then just wait till tomorrow's class, and I think it'll be much easier. But I feel like you probably could do it now anyway. So if you have time and you want to, write it. And if not, tomorrow, and don't worry about when you do it, because when you do it is when I'll review it, even if it's a month from now. So,
Okay. Awesome.
All right. Have a good day. I'll see you tomorrow, 9:30.
See you tomorrow. Have a good Saturday. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.